Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. Excited as always to bring you another edition of the show, but also another wonderful guest. Today's guest is none other than Tiffany. Tiffany has many accolades, including being a wife, mother, survivor, motivational speaker, and has really done so many great things to help so many people. And so we are going to get the opportunity today to hear from Tiffany, learn from Tiffany, and absolutely learn more about their incredible story. And so with that, we will be speaking with Tiffany soon, and I hope you tune in because it is sure to be a treat.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today, we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment, Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at msusatexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Fix Global at www.hopeyxglobal.org.
Hello, once again, everyone. Welcome to the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. And our wonderful guest today was none other than Tiffany Parker. Tiffany Parker is not only a wife, mother, sexual abuse survivor, and motivational speaker dedicated to paving a path for future generations. Tiffany's passion for survivors of human trafficking has taken her all over the country to educate first responders on how to recognize, respond, and reclaim victims of human trafficking. She's a two-time published author. Tiffany uses her own story of abuse and overcoming trauma to bring a face to sexual abuse and encourage other survivors to face their trauma and conquer their demons. And so with that, we are super excited to have you on the show today, Tiffany. And so thank you for taking the time to even be with us, for all you've done. But also, if you could just let viewers know just a little bit more about you, who you are, a little bit about your journey, what led you here today.
Sure, absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for letting me on the show. I'm very excited to be here. It's such an honor, and such an honor to be nominated. My book be nominated. Whispered Like Wildfire was my first book. It was actually, so my husband has PTSD, and he went through counseling, and they told him to write his trauma down like you would a newspaper article. And so that's how my story came out. Is I tried that, and out comes a book from it. And I was very blessed that people wanted to read my story. But a little bit about me is I grew up by a trauma survivor that never actually was able to get the help that she needed. So I grew up raising her. I was raped the first time when I was 13 years old by a 27-year-old Navy SEAL. I was blamed for it in my culture, and the woman was always at fault. And so my life just kind of catapulted. After that, I was forced into a marriage at 16 years old in the hopes that, there would be some glimmer at the end of my dark tunnel. And by 19, I was homeless, sleeping on somebody's laundry room floor, working at an ice cream shop, trying to get enough money to work my way through my EMT program. I ended up becoming an EMT, moved around the country doing that, became a firefighter. Been doing that for the last 13 years. And that's kind of where I got my footing, and I've kind of worked my way up through the ranks. I now have 6 degrees, make, enough money to support my beautiful family. And we have 7 kids, 5 dogs. You can see my sugar gliders in the background. So enough money to support my habit of animals. And that's kind of where I'm at now, writing my books and teaching other people that you aren't what you were and you can overcome life.
Man, and so and we love it. We love to see the dog lover, because I'm a fellow dog lover, so I definitely appreciate that, and all of that. But I also, and thank you so much for even sharing that, and what a little summary of all of those things. But you said a big thing there is that so you raised in where there was trauma. I mean, as a result, you also know it, you've seen it, you can recognize it, but also because the person had now dealt with their trauma, you ended up basically raising them. And so I think that's like an incredible thing to say, because, it's incredible hearing it now, especially because I'm seeing an adult. But at the time, that means that as a child, when you should have been a child, you were essentially having to take on responsibilities bigger and greater than yourself at a time where you should have just been enjoying your own childhood. So I feel like it's I think it's amazing in general when we look back on our childhoods and we're like, wow, I don't even know how I got through all of that, and all those stages. But I just think that already was definitely very moving to me just to hear that part, and just, and of course it's made you, obviously, I think it's definitely anything that happens in our childhood definitely shapes us as individuals. And I feel like it's, what influences us later on, and, the different kind of life paths we take. And I just think you clearly led your life into such a plentiful one. So it's awesome to see going from that, and then still being able to use that to then, help others build your own family, have this, great life that you have. But that was remarkable to hear. And so I feel like, do you think that it made you kind of get a lot of independence early on? Is there any part of it that you wish could have been any different, or what kind of lessons would you say you gained from that part?
So I would not be who I am today if I hadn't gone through the things that I've gone through. So by no stretch of the imagination would I change anything in my past, but it did change a lot of things for me. Like I mentioned, I have 7 kids, and one of the big important things for me is that they get to enjoy their childhood. If that means grounding my son in the morning because he was up at 4 a.m. playing his video game still, then by all means, I hope that you get grounded 12 more times playing video games, because I want you to be a child. I don't want you to face the adult consequences and the adult actions that I did as a very young child. I was already working at 10 years old. And there was no childhood for me. A little bit about my mom. If you read my book, you'll read more, but she was a trafficking survivor, multiple rapes throughout her life, starting at 2 years old. So she really didn't have the capacity to be an adult. So it was more like living with my best friend that was also suicidal, also had severe trauma and a lot of issues that she didn't know how to deal with. And sometimes that came out in tears, sometimes that came out in anger. You just kind of never knew what was going on. Now, a little caveat, my mom is the most incredible woman on the earth. I have nothing negative to say about her. She would give you the shirt off of her back. And once again, I wouldn't be the human that I am today if it wasn't for what I went through. So this has absolutely nothing negative to do with my mom. She's a phenomenal, wonderful woman. I'm so grateful to have her in my life. And because she went through that, because I went through that as an adult, what I work on now, I can go back to my mom and say, hey, you never got the trauma therapy that you needed, and have been able to work with her to get her the help that she needed, 20, 40 years ago, when that wasn't a thing. I mean, even 20 years ago, saying that you were going to a counselor, you might as well have told people that you were a psychopath. I mean, there was no delineation between the two. You couldn't just go to mental health counseling. You had to have something seriously wrong with you. So allowing people to now be able to go to counseling, just to go to counseling. And I go to counseling just because I want to. My husband and I go to marriage counseling, not because we have a bad marriage, but because you can always make everything better. And there's always a third party. And now my husband, because of his PTSD and what I work on, we encourage everybody to go to counseling, whether you need it or not. And so now I'm able to help my mom and help other people. But I would not change my past, but I definitely, it's not a something that I will ever allow my children to experience.
Absolutely. And it's knowing, and I very much appreciate that. And I think I operate that same way as a mom. So I feel like I definitely, I wouldn't change anything either, but I definitely find myself not wanting the same, or just remembering how I felt also as a child and not wanting them to have those feelings either, have those same experiences, especially if they don't need to. Like if I, like yourself, have afforded myself the opportunity to give them a different lifestyle, that's, what I'm trying to do as well. So I absolutely applaud that. But I also appreciate, what you mentioned, that it's also, this doesn't mean that just because there was some, negative experiences, you understand like how trauma operates. And so, like you said, it definitely doesn't mean that, by any means that your mother or any person that has had parents, and were raised by parents dealing with trauma have bad parents. It's just that is something very hard to deal with. I mean, trauma is like, so I appreciate the mention because it definitely takes over. I mean, it really affects, your mind, how you see things. I mean, it really is, your brain also responds to it, in a certain way. And I think as a result, that's why a lot of people sometimes blame themselves, after trauma happens, because they feel like they should have a better situation on it, or they should have been able to get out of certain situations, but that's not how that works. That's not how abuse works. And that's not how trauma works. And so I think that was, very important that you brought those two things up. And you also brought up trafficking, which I don't feel like we have enough conversations on the show about. Our own host, Eileen, is also a survivor of human trafficking, but we don't have enough conversations about that. And so what I'm curious about is, given the fact that, like you said, now you're able to help your mom and others, could you also help viewers today learn a little bit more about, the connections between all of those things and a little bit about trafficking itself?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, trafficking. I could do a 10-hour series just on human trafficking. So for those of you that don't know, that is what I do for a living, is I educate on human trafficking. I didn't know what human trafficking was originally. I didn't know what my mom had gone through, had a name, my mom's story was she ran away with a girlfriend of hers, and she was trafficked by truck drivers, which is a very, very common trafficking system, is long haul truck drivers. And in order for one of them to survive, they had to pick who got to survive and who didn't get to come home. And my mom, I don't know if it's the lucky person or the unlucky person, but she is the person that got to come home. And I know she, excuse me, she's carried that guilt for her entire life, that she was the one that was chosen to come home and the friend never did. But trafficking, so I can tell you a little bit about trafficking. Trafficking is every person, if you look to your left and to your right, they could be a trafficker or they could be a victim of trafficking. So 1 out of every 4 women is a victim of human trafficking. We don't call them victims in my line of work. We call them survivors, because we're not victims. We survived something and here we are. So 1 out of 4 are survivors of human trafficking. And then 1 out of 6 males are survivors of human trafficking. That means that people that you are interacting with every single day, one of them have been trafficked, but maybe they don't know the term, or maybe they blame themselves. A big thing that we learn with men is it takes them many, many, many years, if ever, to come clean about, I was trafficked, I was abused. And what we're learning now is terrorism, gangs, any types of initiation, that's what they're using, is trafficking. Trafficking is becoming the #1 growing criminal enterprise in the entire world. It's the most productive criminal enterprise in the world. It bears the most money, and it is all over the United States. One of the things that I get when I travel to conferences around the world talking about trafficking. One of the things that I get is, it's not really that bad, is it? It's not really happening here in the United States, is it? And a big thing is, well, we're not in China. I'm like, no, we're not in China, but it's not, it happens in China, it happens in Mexico, it happens in, put whatever country you want to in there, but the #1 buyer of trafficking victims is right here in the United States. So if you see something that's strange, in my education, I talk about symbols that you can recognize. There's a way that traffickers communicate between one another, that they do it right in front of our eyes and we never even know it. So, but if you see something that is odd, or your child is acting strange, they are getting secluded in their video games or in a certain group of people, or you see a child, I have a little neighbor girl right now that we're working with that, she just things weren't adding up. Things, ran away a lot. Things just weren't. I mean, if you have children, you kind of know how your children behave and what a normal child would behave like. And I just highly suggest that if you see something like that, report it. It doesn't hurt you, it doesn't hurt them, but it does hurt them not to report it. And not just children, but adults too. There's adults that are going through it. You recognize it by substance abuse and, being withdrawn, the way that they behave. So there are so many ways that we can recognize human trafficking. And if we would just open our eyes to it and realize it's happening right here in our, and I apologize for the reference, but in our all white communities, in our upper class communities, in the, oh, it would never happen here communities, that's where it's happening. It's not happening in the lower class, all Hispanic communities. Now, let me rephrase that. Hispanic males between 30 and 40 are the #1 trafficked human beings in the world. So it's not just little girls, it's Hispanic men, but it's happening everywhere. It's not just happening in those poor communities, in those underprivileged communities. It's happening right here where you think, oh, we are way better than that. We are way above that. Yeah. And those are the people that are buying trafficking victims. So keep your eyes open and look, and there's always an opportunity to report it to law enforcement.
Absolutely. You're right. Oh, no. And I was about to say, you definitely don't have to apologize for the reference either, because I feel like it's needed. And I think that's the point. I'm glad that you even gave us that, short intro. I agree that trafficking alone requires, you can talk so much about it, but also it deserves that much attention as well. And so I'm definitely glad you said it, because I've also led some informational sessions on it, and I agree. It's so much more common. I'm in Ohio, and we're also one of the #1, but we actually get ranked. And so I've actually have talked with individuals about, I think we're like maybe top 3 or like all of that. We have access to highways, and so trafficking also happens here thanks to the access that they have. If we can get somebody out of the state and out of the country, Detroit is connected right to Canada. Then trafficking occurs. If there's access, if there's an opportunity where there are hotels, it's happening. It literally happens right before our very eyes. But in Ohio, we at least are ranked. In other states, they're not even ranked because they're not even having the conversation. They're like acting like it's not even a thing there. We don't even need to have a ranking. We're not even going to worry about that issue. And so those are definitely worse. And I, unfortunately, don't find it surprising that in your line of work, given that you're dedicated to trafficking, that's what you've heard. The fact that you heard, well, it's not that serious, is it? First of all, what? That just, okay. Because first of all, if it was, we wouldn't even know the word trafficking. We wouldn't even need that language. We wouldn't even know what is, what that is. But no, it absolutely is. And even if it wasn't, let's say, I would love to live in a world where the trafficking numbers, really, trafficking should be 0 for it to not be an issue. If there's one case of trafficking, I feel like it matters. But we, and that would be maybe the more ideal. But the reality is it shouldn't be happening at all. And unfortunately, it is happening at alarming rates. And so, like you mentioned, and I appreciate the mention of that it's happening to populations that we don't always think of. We do automatically think, even when you put in missing girls in Google, a lot of times you'll tend to see just you'll definitely tend to see a lot of females of color is what is really going to come up. You'll see that, or you'll see, and actually you'll see a lot of stereotypes as well. You'll see some of them looking different ways. And then, when it does come to, other females, you'll see different. When it comes to white females versus females that are missing of color, you'll see those different dichotomies. But what's interesting is that I don't actually see Hispanic males nowhere on Google connected to trafficking. So for that to even be there. And I also have shared that with males, there is a lot of, intrigue to being able to, or also advantage to having males being trafficked. And I'm sure all about that and why that's also a thing. But, that's also something I don't think it's talked about. Males don't get pregnant. And so it's actually, that's also why they tend to, get trafficked as well. And so that's one of the advantages. But that's how it's horrific. The fact that that's even why, the fact that individuals are literally being sold, the fact that they're then gaining profits off of lives that they have taken and have completely destroyed is incredible. And so, I mean, for your mom to even have had any exposure to that, survived it, and still be living to tell the story is already, beyond remarkable. So that's why I agree. Any survivor in general, including your mother, shout out, because I mean, it shouldn't happen to anyone. No one deserves it, but it is incredible to even, be able to go through that, let alone get out of that life and then still be able to live what we hope to be some kind of productive life afterward.
Yeah, even function. I mean, even
Right.
my mom is a phenomenal, productive member of society, but just the fact that she functioned for so many years.
Right.
And I want to commend her just for waking up every morning, because not everybody would have.
Right.
Some people would have put a gun in their mouth, and she didn't. She chose to wake up every morning and have children and build a life. And now she's a beautiful, wonderful woman with a great career. And if you were to look at her, you want to be like, clearly that's a trafficking victim with a lot of trauma. You look at her, she looks like a normal woman. She fights her demons on the inside. And I mean, that is it. I don't want her to fight her demons on the inside. I want her to show the world her demons so that we could all fight them with her. But what a phenomenal story to have overcome something and come out on top. That's what that is my story. That is the story of my survivors and that's what I want people to take away from our conversation is you can still come out on top. You can have the world bury on top of you. You can have everything collapse on top of you. But when you get out of the rubble, you're standing on top. And that is so important. You are not where you started. And as long as you keep going, eventually you're going to make it to the top. And that's where we all want to be. We all want to be on top, whether you have trauma in your past or not, whether your parents are politicians or doctors or lawyers or drug addicts. Everybody wants to end up on top. And I feel like as survivors, we made it. We made it to the top. Maybe we're not the president of the United States. We're not billionaires, but we're at the top. We weren't crushed by all of the stuff that came on top of us.
I absolutely agree. And I love that sounds similar to the work that you do with others, like as I remember hearing, that you are able to help other survivors with that same mentality, being able to help them also conquer their demons, being able to help them realize the value of overcoming, but also recognizing first, that it is difficult, that it is something wrong, but it's worth doing, like being able to do that. And you deserve to see life on the other side and not still live, and operate out of that trauma that you once had. And so I definitely love hearing that. I am curious though, I love that you're able to help your mom and that you were also able to share that experience with her. Was she receptive to it at the beginning? Because I know it can be hard to even face your trauma though when you've been in it, and then all of that. Was there, is she still doing the therapy now? I'm just curious how she responded.
So yes and no is the answer to that question. She's told me her story a little bit along the way. This would happen, that would happen. And she would kind of, I can relate to this. She did try to kill herself twice as a child. And I didn't understand that, the 2 and 2 didn't come together. My brother was murdered when I was 15. He was 19. So I'm looking at, it's this one instance with my brother that has my, not realizing that was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and my mom's life filled with trauma. So I'd heard these stories growing up, but we had never talked. My very first abuser was when I was 5 years old. It was my brother, not the one that was murdered, another brother. And he molested me for somewhere between 3 and 5 years before I finally told my mom. And when I told her, her response was anger, but as a 7 to 10-year-old child, I took that anger as she's mad at me. I did something wrong. I will never discuss this again. I'm the bad one. In her mind, she was saying, I'm so very angry that I couldn't protect my child from something that I have been through. I'm angry at my other child as well for being the attacker. And so we closed that chapter of the book, and we didn't open it again for another 20 years when I wrote my book. So when I wrote my book, I told my mom, I've got some stuff in my book, and maybe we should talk about it before you read it. And the first one was, do you remember me telling you about my brother? And that's when the first time we were able to talk about it. So she has her moments where she is receptive of it, but sometimes when the trauma gets too much to bear, I don't know that it's not that she's receptive, it's that she just can't unbury herself, and she can't see through I'm not a registered counselor. So when she is having one of these moments, I do have some psychology, some, sociology. I don't quite have my PhD in psychology yet. If anybody would like to pay for that, that'd be fantastic. But until that moment, I just have some training. So I'm not the best person to walk her through it, but she'll have her moments where she just shuts down, and I just have to let her, because we all have that. And so yes and no. She is as receptive as somebody without formal therapy can be, but still to find a counselor that is specifically educated and knows how to work with trauma victims that have dealt with true trauma, not mental or psychological, but true trauma is very, very hard to find. I know one person here in DFW that truly deals with victims of trauma, and I have her booked so full she'll never be able to see another patient again. So imagine that, it's hard to get her into the right kind of counselor that actually knows human trafficking, the type of trauma that she saw, and not just the mental trauma. But she does see a counselor. She does try to work through it, and then I help as much as I can. I think she'll always have those aha moments, and then the shutdown. She still refers to herself, go back a little bit, when my mom was 12 years old, she ran away and ended up with a 40-year-old drug lord, for lack of a better term, one of the largest drug dealers in our state at the time. And when she was a, quote, good girl, she would be given drugs, food, a pillow to sleep on, blankets to sleep under. When she was, quote, a bad girl, the drugs would be taken away, the amenities for her daily life, no food. And then people would be killed in front of her to show her what happens when you're a bad girl. And so still as a 57-year-old woman, she still refers to herself as a good girl or a bad girl. And it takes everything in my trauma mind to not freak out on her and say, you are not a good girl or a bad girl. You're not a dog. Life isn't based on whether you're good or bad. So she still has her moments. We work through it. And she's as receptive as she can be with somebody with 57 years worth of trauma built in. And, I'm about 5 years into human trafficking training and education. So, we've got a long way to go, but she's better now than she's ever been in her whole life, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I just appreciate you sharing, because to be honest, I also just wanted to make sure that we echo how okay that is, that she's where she's at, because she's allowed to be wherever you or she is in her progress. And also to viewers who know that they might have some kind of, connection to trauma in any way. It's okay wherever you are as well. If you're also resonating with the fact that, I feel like that. I feel like I'm at the beginning. I haven't really found a counselor yet. And, I'm not sure if that's where I want to go yet. Or I did try. And like you said, I didn't find one that had the right background. And I didn't think it was the best fit. I just think what I appreciate about what you shared is that it's absolutely okay. Because first of all, trauma is what's not okay. It's not okay that you went through something traumatic. It's not okay that you were abused in any form or fashion. But what is okay now is that you get to, go at your own pace, and that you're developing your own way and heal on your own timeline. You no longer have to go on the abuser's timeline if you so happen to get that chance to escape, which I'm so glad your mom got, and any survivor that gets that is always something that I'm going to be joyful about, because I just, I hate to see it happen, in the first place. But I totally agree. And I think there's such, value in that, and, being able to honor your process and, where you are and, how you can do it, but also just that it's, we all do deserve that. And so I think there's a lot of us that, like, similarly to like what you said, also have had those negative messages, maybe not the same ones, as your mom had, although clearly that's how you know the impacts that they have. I mean, for her to still be, here, it's such a, I know it's a sad illustration of it in one way, but also just such a realistic illustration in another, that is how impactful it is. And so those messages we get, they stay with us for a lot of us, especially if we don't, give ourselves that permission to seek the help wherever it is and however it is. Because maybe for some, they're like, well, I actually have a mentor that I speak to, and that's good enough for me. That's fine, because maybe for some that, they might not resonate with someone. And like you said, or maybe there is a great counselor, but that person is booked up, whatever it may be. But it's just, there is such value in that. And I always am gonna love when we have use this show as an opportunity to remind that like abuse is not okay, but your healing absolutely is. And, and you being able to honor yourself in whatever way possible and helping yourself get to the happiness that you may have been robbed of at one point in time, but that you absolutely deserve to enjoy now.
And I'll mention that, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no.
I keep talking about I came out on top, or we're on top. And so that doesn't mean that I don't still have my triggers. I still cannot, if I'm walking through a doorway and somebody else is standing in that doorway, even though they don't mean to impede my progress through that doorway, it is an instant trigger for me. And I go from 0 to 100 in less than a second. So it's not that you get out on top and the clouds break free and life is, sugar and unicorns. And if you're watching this and you're like, I guess I thought I was doing okay, but apparently not, because I still have triggers. I think we will always have those triggers. I'm very grateful to a husband that understands, and I can just tell him he triggered me and he steps back and he moves away and he leaves me alone, or he'll, what can I do? Do you want me to come? Do you want me to stay? Do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? Because he understands that he is not the issue, that it is the trauma, and I will always have a trauma brain. Maybe we can work to revert the triangle. And if you've been to my training, you understand what that means. But, maybe one day it'll be that he can stand in a doorway and I too can stand in a doorway and life will just be great. But until then, he understands that I've triggered you and it's not my fault. It's not her fault. And we move past it. But don't blame yourself if you're not where I'm at, or you're not where your friend next door is, or the lady in your group therapy is, or where your counselor thinks you should be. Be just so grateful that you are where you are, that you are not 6 feet under, because that is where, we all could have been at one point in our lives, and we've all chosen to overcome that. Until you're 6 feet under, you're doing better than you were doing ever. And so just keep pushing forward and be happy that you are who you are. I'm okay with my triggers. I work through them. I work through them with my counselor. I work through them with my husband. I work through them with my close colleagues and other survivors, but I'm okay with them because I know that I'm overcoming them and that they make me who I am, and I will eventually overcome them. And if I don't, then I've got a great support system that, knows how to help me through them and work through them with me.
Absolutely. And I appreciate too that you mentioned so incredibly that, in the process of you, getting to this, new place and, being able to process things, your book actually was an opportunity, it was another opportunity. And now that book is definitely going to help others as well, who can absolutely see themselves in it, be inspired by all of that. But I just find it so incredible too, that what was also something, for you, but also for others, also was an opportunity to reconnect with your mother. So I just find that also incredible, and didn't want that to also be remiss that in the midst of you sharing, you also shared that it gave you that opportunity that you may not have had, because like you said, it's just meeting people where they are and when they're ready to have those conversations and all of that. But there was a lot there that you also mentioned that I just want to at least identify or recognize, is that that's major too, though, that, how we internalize messages. And so I think the big thing for me was when I heard that, your mother naturally was very upset, but upset because, like you said, as a mom, you always want to make sure you can help your children. You never want to feel that they're in danger, and, shared that anger. But unfortunately, as a kid, it's so powerful how, kids will see that and will do that. And kids will also adjust and do things to please others to avoid any kind of angry response. And so, that's why sometimes kids find themselves in abusive situations, because they literally try to, do what they can. They're not sure how to interpret the situation when it's happening, especially if it's one they've never seen before. But when it's abusive, usually kids tend to think, okay, well, I got to do something to not get in this situation or to upset anyone else or for me to be in it. So they try to do that. So what's, just like I said, so much is that, you yourself can speak to. And I just love that you've dedicated your life to helping other survivors like yourself, because you not only survived it, but also had to help others not feel so upset about what was happening, with your mom, so it's just the fact that you were able to balance all of that at the same time and now still be here now helping others, figure that out and still, do all that. No small feat there. So that's why I'm I just also wanted to absolutely recognize how incredible that is. For sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. And so with that, I mean, I'm also, curious about, speaking of, like, the fact that you've, now made these books and, you help all these people, motivational speaker, all these things. I am curious how you went, how, you made that transition to doing the, the help. Like, I'm sure it wasn't maybe like an immediate thing, but you went from being a survivor yourself, growing up like the way you did, like, and, and probably in some ways growing up a little bit quicker, and than others and all that, but still using that to also then, lead this other life. Were there certain mentors along the way that helped you? Did you slowly but surely find yourself in this work, or how'd you get there?
So I definitely do believe in, I don't know. I definitely believe in, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in our destiny, but I definitely believe that there was some divine intervention. So when I got out of the fire service, I went into emergency management. And through that, I got a job at a police department doing emergency management. And that's when I learned, when I got my formal human trafficking training. And I met a lady that worked for Reclaim 611, the founder of Reclaim 611, the company that I work for. And that is how her and I became friends. We built a relationship. She was looking for the first responder side of it, and I was looking for the clinical side of it, since I was working for a police department within a hospital. And it kind of grew out of that. So in 2019, I was praying a lot. I really wanted to focus more on trafficking. It was clearly my passion. I have a dual master's, and one of that is in counterterrorism. Well, when you learn counterterrorism, the biggest thing you learn in counterterrorism is human trafficking. It's relation to human trafficking, because that is how they get all of their money with their terror cells, is trafficking. So it was slowly, my degrees are slowly tying in this information and all of this learning stuff. So in 2019, I'm like, God, I have these degrees that I want to utilize, but I want to utilize them in human trafficking. I want to help people. I want to help survivors like myself. I don't want little girls to be told that they are the reason why they were raped. They were the reason why they were abused. So I want to quit my job, but I can't just up and quit my job. So give me a way. And lo and behold, COVID happened. And God's like, here you go. The whole world, I'm doing this to the whole world just so you can quit your job. I'm kidding. I got laid off from Baylor, along with 1,400 of my closest colleagues. And I was not sad at all. I was so grateful, because it gave me an opportunity to work in human trafficking. I still had a side job. I was able to work from home, continuing to make money while focusing on human trafficking. That's when I got into doing conferences. And by the time I did my first conference, it only took one conference for people to be like, holy crap, we need this person to come do all of the conferences. And my name is not just me, but the name of the people that I speak with, my organization's name is slowly spread, where people are now calling me saying, hey, we have a conference up in Minnesota. We have a conference up in Canada. Please come tell people what you taught me about human trafficking, because I didn't realize it was so bad. So it has been a slow process of one step in front of the other, knowing I wanted to do something. There's one of my kids back there. Knowing I wanted to do something, praying a lot, understanding, believing in divine intervention, and having a community around me that wants the same thing, meeting other survivors that want the same thing. Last year, in fact, I met this incredible man. His name's Rodney Daniels. His daughter is still missing. And I was doing a Homeland Security conference, and he asked to be part of our panel and brought along. Weird circumstances happened. It was me and 3 other colleagues. Well, somehow throughout time, these 3 people dropped out, and it ended up being this guy, Rodney, and this young lady, Alicia Tappan. That those names are so important. Write them down. They are the best people ever, especially when it comes to human trafficking. So they ended up being on my panel with me, and we made this beautiful friendship. And Rodney actually got me a job that allows me to travel around the country, getting paid by my job, while also getting to attend these conferences and speak in human trafficking. So it may not be what I do full time, but it is full time where my heart is. And I've been given an opportunity to work at a job where my boss, Rodney, allows me to still speak at these conferences. He's supportive, he understands. Alicia and I do survivor leader retreats every year. So it started slow. It started with hey, this is the education I took. My mom let me go back to that is what that was that happened to my mom, and steps all the way to where I'm at now. So it was not, I wish I just jumped right into it head first, and now I'm making millions of dollars doing what I love. I wish I was out in China, knocking down doors and getting trafficking victims, or here in, all white America getting trafficking victims, but I'm not there yet. I will be one day. Until then, I'm just so blessed to be where I'm at in the stage where I can, be on the internet with you, talking to these beautiful people, letting them know that trafficking is a real thing. And, we're out there, and we're going to shut it down. It may not be tomorrow, but one day we're going to shut it down.
Absolutely. And I can't echo that enough. And I feel like that's why we need to have more individuals, like yourself, who can, and who are not afraid to have this conversation, and to be able to talk about it and talk about the value of it, and why the education in those areas are needed, especially when we got people thinking that, no, it's not that bad. And that, like, maybe it's not happening. Like, that's especially when, we need it the most. But I so appreciate that, it's like that. And what's interesting is that second time, I would say this week, that I've heard like blessing that actually came out of the pandemic. We don't always hear that. We hear that the pandemic was rough,
I loved it.
It robbed us. Exactly. But for some of us, it did. And similarly to you, at first, I was not a fan of the pandemic because I lost a job. And actually, in my case, I had actually just gotten a job I really did like. So because like yourself, I was actually had an opportunity to do advocacy in the job I had. I was working at a university, and I was able to do a mixture of advocacy and also presentation. So I was able to do prevention work. Like, I thought it was like perfect. And then I lost it during the pandemic. So I was like feeling on the other side. But then it did lead me to some other great opportunities, much like what you described, that I know I would not have considered prior to that. So I was like, okay, well then, if this was the plan, then I get it. In your case though, I love that. Quite the opposite. Like, you already had a plan, you just didn't have that opportunity yet. So it gave you the opportunity that you and were able to make that connection. So I think it was like always meant to be, clearly, for you to be in this line of work. But just and it gave you that wonderful chance to be able to do what you were destined to do, and so you already have that connection to it as well. So like you said, I love how maybe not full-time like as a career, but definitely full-time on the heart. I agree. And I think with that, and when that's true, I feel like we always find ourselves, bringing that awareness to it. And so it is kind of like we do it, full time. We just may not get paid full time as you deserve to be able to do that, but you're absolutely increasing that message. And so I'm very, I'm just so glad that you were able to do that. I'm also really curious, and I know others might not always know why this is needed, but I know in your line of work now, now with the human trafficking, part of it is also training the first responders, as you mentioned, and all that. So I'm curious, if you could help others understand why that's so needed, and maybe what some of that training entails.
Yes. And before I answer that, I want to go back to the story I just told you and tell something. Again, I've been in this for a couple of years now. Something I learned this year is Indigenous people. You talk about, you were talking about Hispanic men are on the list, and people of color and whites are designated. First of all, we're all in the same. There isn't no, I keep making this joke of all white America, because that's what these people are like in these white communities, where it doesn't matter. It's happening everywhere. But what we aren't learning is how you think it's bad here. You think it's bad in Mexico or China. It is horrendous in Native American populations, in these tribes, because they're not under our same laws. They don't have to report it the way they do. And the women don't get the same help that we do. So it's not just, that is a big one. I just learned this within the last year, and, getting the rate that women are raped and murdered on Native American land is, if you could look at the numbers, you would just be, everybody would drop what they're doing right now for their careers and focus on how do we help these Indigenous people, because they are being murdered by their own people at alarming rates, because there's just nothing. As a firefighter working right next to a Native American reservation, when a crime would be committed on their reservation, because they didn't have a fire department, EMS, they would drive somebody over to the line, drop them over our side of the border, and call 911 and say, there's a victim of whatever, rape, murder, stabbed, shot, come get them. Because if they roll back over to the other side of the line, there's no help for them. So when I say it's not happening or it is happening everywhere, some places just don't get the respect that they deserve. You mentioned that there is when you Google it, it's white people and people of color, and that should absolutely not. It should be, why are people saying it's really not happening in our upper class communities? There should not be any designation between communities, races, classes of people. Trafficking is something that happens to everybody, every class of people, every color, every sex, every designation. And you know what? More than Blacks and whites and males and females, more than Indigenous people, it's the LGBTQ communities that are being targeted. Why? Because they already have to sit down and shut up that they're, LGBTQ, because we are not accepting of that. So we're definitely not going to be accepting of a LGBTQ trafficking victim. I mean, you might as well just don't even bring it up, because we are not accepting of that. So there shouldn't be a designation. These aren't comments that I should be getting at conferences, it's really not happening in my community, right? Why? Because you're not the right color, you're not the right age, why shouldn't it be happening in your community? So please get that out of your head, that it's not happening in your community because you are not of the right list of everything that I just said. It is happening in your community because you're a human and because there are other humans in your community. If you have humans in your community, it's happening in your community. And that's why we educate first responders, because they don't understand. And especially law enforcement, which is my niche. I really enjoy educating law enforcement first and foremost. And I will tell you why I like educating them the most. So when you sit down at a conference as a young female and you tell these big burly law enforcement men, you need to stop calling them prostitutes or working women. You need to start calling them victims. That instantly they're like, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm a cop, and we're done. And they shut down. And then you continue on to the conversation and you explain to them that maybe not all prostitutes are trafficking victims, but 100% of trafficking victims are prostitutes. And then you start going through the signs and red flags of trafficking victims. And every one of them will have that aha moment where they look back at a time that they arrested somebody and realize that they arrested a victim of trafficking, or a victim of trauma or sexual abuse survivor. And every single, and I can say 100% of the first responders that I've trained have that moment where it clicks and they can think back to that one scenario where they knew something just wasn't quite right, but they didn't know what it was. And out of our training, they go, that was a trafficking victim and I arrested them, or I let them go back to their abuser, or I didn't know the signs, or I didn't, whatever they didn't do. And now they know. And now I've put the seed into their mind of looking at people in a different way than we've ever looked at them before. I live here in Dallas, and we've had the opportunity to work with Dallas Police Department and see how much they've grown in human trafficking. And one of the phenomenal things they do is they arrest every prostitute that they come across. In fact, they make it a point to find call girls, working girls, whatever you want to call them, prostitutes, and arrest them. Now you're thinking, well, you just got done saying don't arrest, you're contradicting yourself. Contradicting yourself. Well, they have this great program that they do. So if you reach out to a trafficking victim in front of their abuser, they're not going to say anything, obviously. They're looking at their abuser's watching them, making sure they're not doing anything. But once you've arrested them and you've pulled them away from that situation, there's nobody there that they have to worry about. They take them back to the station, they take the cuffs off, they take them to a beautiful room with snacks and clean clothes and an advocate that knows about trafficking, that knows about trauma, and offers them the ability to get out of the game, is what they call it. So you can either spend 24 hours in the drunk tank, we'll let you go in the morning, you can, have a night off, relax, or we can help you get out. It takes about 10 interactions with a trafficking survivor for that survivor to realize that we are actually there to help. But that is something law enforcement after going through trainings and educations and experiences, has said, you know what, we're tired of following the eyes of a trafficking victim to look and see that that is where you can call it a pimp, but it's their trafficker, is, you know, sitting in a car down the road. Well, we can't arrest them. They're not doing anything wrong. So we are constantly re-victimizing these girls by arresting them, you know, booking them, sending them home, doing it. And, you know, they all have these, every trafficking survivor that you talk to will tell you, I've been arrested so many times, or law enforcement been so aggressive towards me, or, you know, you're the bad guy, you're the drug addict. Well, we're finally starting to change the mind of law enforcement that they're not the bad guy. It's not a working girl that is on drugs. It is a victim that's chemically tied to this monster down the road, and let's get the monster and, you know, stop re-victimizing the victim. So that is why we educate first responders. Firefighters have a phenomenal, firefighters, medics, anybody that has an opportunity to go to a person's house has a better view of what is actually going on there than the rest of us. And as a firefighter, I can tell you, when I walked into a house, it was always looking to see how clean it was, looking to see if the people had food, you know, just kind of eyeing, like, is this a normal house? Is this not a normal house? Why are there chains hooked to the wall over there? You know, but you don't get that opportunity at a hospital or anywhere else. So that's why it's so important to first responders, because they're our eyes and our ears out in the community. They're firefighters and law enforcement are the ones that are welcomed into houses, especially firefighters. You know, if a trafficker calls 911 because his girl is overdosed, he's going to let them in. And he might not let law enforcement in, but he's going to let an EMT in to go put that girl in an ambulance. And so they can be our eyes and ears where we can't always be. And so that is why it is so important and such a burden on my heart to train as many first responders that I can, because they are, I think they will be the #1 contributor to stopping human trafficking.
Absolutely. And so I appreciate so much that, you know, what you shared about that and just the importance of that. And so, like, why that's needed. And even there, like, that I didn't hear necessarily that they were also always intentionally missing these signs and all of that. You know, that's not always the case. And so we also want to, of course, applaud, you know, law enforcement and all the great work that they do. But this is why we want to have like these kind of trainings and these kind of conversations, because it's something that a lot of people miss. And so we definitely need to, you know, what it is that we're even looking for in the first place, if we are going to be able to talk about this. And so I appreciate that you mentioned, you know, how it is that you're doing it and closing that gap, you know, there. And I hope others, you know, are encouraged to do the same, because this is why we need to have this kind of lens and being able, and, you know, a different perspective, and not like a judging one, you know, that automatically, and I get it, because we're trying to, when you're in a job where you're, you know, the goal is to just shut down crime. And if I see something illegal going on, you know, like, let that be the laser focus. But in the midst of that, we might be missing the fact that there are individuals who are being victimized, that are not victims, but that are being victimized, and that unfortunately might be caught up in that web of criminal activity. And so being able to like separate those. So I appreciate that. And I actually also appreciate the clarification on the communities, because I think I actually misspoke when I said it. What I meant to say was that if you Google, unfortunately, what comes up is white females first. So you'll see like a whole myriad of white, there might be a sprinkle of a person of color, but you'll see that as if white girls are the only ones that go missing. And so, and that's not us, you know what I mean? That's unfortunately the web, you know what I mean? Like the social media, like that's what we get. And so, of course, you know, that's what individuals tend to believe. I'm just glad that today we're dispelling that myth and letting it be known that no, it can happen absolutely to everyone. Not only can it is happening to literally a lot of people from all walks of life, from all different kind of communities and all upbringing. So I'm just, you know, I'm glad you clarified that also.
And it makes me so angry because it minimizes Melissa's trauma. It minimizes Eileen's trauma. It minimizes Juan's trauma, because you Google it and it is white females. And that makes me the most angry when people will tell me that it's not really happening here. And I want to say, why? Because you're white? Right. Why? Because you're an American? Why is it not happening why is your community better than the communities that it happens? And maybe that is my soapbox. I get emotional. I get angry because now you're minimizing where it's happening. You're minimizing. These Hispanic men are being killed in troves because they're being trafficked. And, you know, maybe it's labor trafficking. Maybe it isn't sex, but it is trafficking and they are being abused. But because they're not a white female, then it obviously isn't happening, or it's not, their trauma is discounted, and, shame on the internet
Seriously.
for categorizing that. But it is like I mentioned, it is happening to humans, and you are discounting somebody's trauma by saying, and especially the indigenous people, because they're not even spoken about,
Oh, no, not even part of the conversation.
People. Yeah, like that's not even a conversation that we have. What are you talking about? We're talking about, people of color and whites and men, and what are you? Who is this indigenous people? They're not our problem. They're not part of they're a sovereign society. Well, they're still people. We are all still people that are being victimized, and it is your friends and your neighbors that are being victimized. And shame on the people that are categorizing, because that's what we do these days, is we just categorize everything. And law enforcement, we're categorizing all law enforcement as being bad. And you mentioned it perfectly. They are trained to get the bad guy. That is what they are trained for. Generations, they were trained to look for the bad. And if there wasn't crime, then they were useless. And now we're just now at a point where we're training law enforcement to be the heroes, to actually go in and be the good guys. And for so many generations, that's not what they were. They were in to arrest the bad guy. We called law enforcement for a young trafficking survivor. She was 12 years old. The law enforcement officer came in, and this is an example of somebody that had not gone through training. And he came in, he goes, well, all I can do is arrest her for prostitution. And we're like, she's 12, a 12-year-old can't consent to sex. How can a 12-year-old be a prostitute? That's rape. That is trafficking. And that is every definition of everything bad in the world. She is not a criminal, but this is a cop that was looking for a crime, because that's what cops do. That's what cops were trained for so long. And now we're trying to move to the mindset where they look at them and go, let's find the bad guy. The bad guy is not the person sitting in front of me. This is a victim. We're teaching them how to talk to somebody with a trauma brain. Because if you arrested my mom at some point in her 57 years, which she's been arrested probably more times than I have fingers, and she fought or spit or bit because she got a trauma brain. And that is, even though she was a victim, she was trained to, her mindset. So a normal brain is like this, and a trauma brain is like this. So that understanding that cognitive is at the bottom, whereas it should be on the top. Right. And so I'm getting on the soapbox again, but we can't just all categorize. We can't bulk. We can't, all cops are bad. All people are bad. Only white women are victimized. Only, you gotta open your mind and realize that anybody can be a victim. Anybody can be a survivor, and anybody can help them. You don't have to be a cop to help a trafficking survivor. I'm not a police officer, and I'll do everything in my power to get the little girl next door to us some help. You don't have to be this color or that designation or this. You don't have to be gay or straight. You just have to be a human, and you are vulnerable, and the humans in your community are vulnerable, and the humans in the community can help too. We're all, we can all be in this together, and all of our communities can be in this together, because we're all standing targets, and we all have the ability to help.
Absolutely. And I think also, like you mentioned, shame on the internet, yes. But the good thing is that's I think we should use it as a reminder that we don't always need to get our information directly from there, and that it's helpful if we get it from individuals who have knowledge, experience, can provide trainings, such as Tiffany Parker. So, I think that's, a better place to be able to do it. And so but without knowing that, now. So I hope viewers are, aware. And actually, because of that, I probably could, yes, definitely talk to you so much more about so many things. I couldn't even believe that it's actually already about to be an hour. So yeah. What I want to give you space now for is that, since we will leave it on a cliffhanger, if there are individuals who do want to connect with you, learn from you, work with you, whatever it may be, and also the book. I know you touched on that, but also if they want to purchase it, all those wonderful things, could you let them know how they can do that?
Yes, absolutely. So you can email me anytime, tiffany.parker@reclaim611.org. Melissa, I'll leave you all my information. You can send it out to whomever. You can buy my books on Amazon. It's Whispered Like Wildfire. It's my book on trauma. And then my second book, you forgot to mention, is a parenting book, because, you know, what do you do when you have 7 kids and you like to write? You write a parenting book. So you can also find that on Amazon. You can find that book at any store, any bookstore that you go to. But Whispered Like Wildfire is something that I self-published. I mean, you can only find that one on Amazon, or if you see me at a conference, I always got them on me at conferences. But yeah, see, people can text me, email me. If they email me, all my information is on my email. I love to talk with people. I love to connect with people. My training is free. One day I'll charge for it, but I'm not there yet. I just want to educate people. So I'll leave you my information, and anybody that's interested in getting a hold of me is more than welcome to. I'd love to answer questions and do what I can to help your community learn what trafficking is and what you guys can do to do your part in stopping trafficking.
Absolutely. So y'all heard it here. There is a way to be able to connect, and I encourage you to do so. If anything resonated with you, if there's anything that also touched you, but also just to feel encouraged and know that there are individuals out there that can help and can absolutely, you know, make this process that much easier and rewarding. So with that, it has been a pleasure. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share before we officially end our time together.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for letting me on. And again, contact me, even if you're like, hey, something you said in there really made me mad and I want to talk to you about it. Email me. I'm happy to hear it. I'm happy to discuss, because, you know, I'm learning too, and we're all in a process of learning, and I look forward to hearing from people.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in.